Hi.
Hi,
Hi, Riane. How are you?
and you grew again.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to adjust
You're doing a great job. It's not fair. I'm being so flippant about my centering of my face. And Riane is like, but I keep trying. She keeps trying to find me. And here I am, like moving the camera all over the place because I have so many screens going on at the same time. Don't worry, Riane, you are the biggest name and the most important voice. I mean, I am entirely biased. Uh-oh, hold on. I am entirely biased, but I think you're the most important voice in the world. So even if I take up the entire screen, it dwarfs in comparison to your impact.
Well, I think that I'm a conduit for a very important message.
Would you like to start with that?
Well, we have an alternative to domination, and it's called partnership. And we actually, that alternative for our culture is deeply rooted in our past. And there are a lot of trends toward it. The women's movement globally, the children's rights movement, the environmental movement, the peace movement, the social and economic justice movements, the anti racism movement, they're all challenging the same thing, a tradition of domination. So, what we have are these movements, on the one hand, without a frame, and then with a frame, we have the regression as a reaction to these movements that we're in right now globally, including the United States, the regression to what I call the domination end of the domination partnership social scale. So, my message is very simple. Um, Not only do we have a better alternative, a more survival oriented, a thriving oriented alternative, but unless we move in a partnership direction quickly, uh, look, we are interconnected not only globally by technologies of uh, transportation and communication, but by nuclear bombs, and more slowly by climate change. And the domination system is not adaptive, not adaptive. It cannot meet these challenges because it is based on fear, violence, in group versus out group thinking and acting. So that is my message, and as you know, I'm very passionate about it.
Thank you. Riane. So, for quick context, Riane Eisler, as obviously I'm incredibly biased, and you heard me already sing her praises. Riane Eisler has published many, many books, hundreds of articles. She has been lauded as one of the most important voices of our time, and I really mean like of our time, like spanning many generations. And while here at the Land of Anne, we are committed to making sure that we center so many different kinds of voices. Riane carries the torch of a generation of a specific life experience, and the way that she talks about it is it's a very, not that it's unfamiliar, but it's an untraditional voice of somebody who is 94 years old, a Holocaust survivor, a social scientist, an author living in the fabulous tiny little corner of Northern California. But the wisdom that she offers is something that I'm both ashamed that the world hasn't been listening to, and I also wrestle with whether or not I'm hopeful that we can heed her warning. And Riane, my question for you as you talk about and lay out domination based structures, that it's very simple. There's only two spots in a domination based system, which is the state of the world. You're either the one with power or the one underneath the person who has power. You are either the boss, the employee, the parent, the child, the government, the elected official, the constituent. I'm at a place of feeling not hopeful with regard to what I see around the world. I'm so excited about what I saw in Nepal just this past week. I'm so excited about what I'm tracking is happening in Myanmar and happening in Nairobi, but I'm devastated about what I see happening at home. And I am curious to know, as a Holocaust survivor and somebody who's seen so much, what convinces you that a shift toward partnership is still possible?
Well, history convinces me of that. The much idealized past. Yes, of course, the United States has some wonderful, wonderful accomplishments. It was the first nation, really, to reject rule by kings, a tradition of domination that was supposedly divinely ordained. But we also had slavery, anti Semitism, which is a European tradition and now a global tradition. Uh, we had tarring and feathering, if you can believe that. I mean, really, any voice that spoke against domination was out. It was, we have to recognize that there are many, many traditions of domination, like the tarring and feathering, for example, that we inherited, that we've left some of them behind. Look at what's happened to the status of women and what the regression to domination really is singling out. Gender. There are only two genders, right? Men and women, nobody in between, even though there has been people in between since time immemorial. And yes, one is ranked over the other. Men and quote masculinity as defined by violence, by domination, uh, by fear imposing, right? Um, is to be on top, and anything labeled quote feminine, which is what we all value, which is caring for people starting at birth, caring for our natural environment, for our Mother Earth, which we depend upon for life. I mean, for life, really, that caring, don't we? But it's relegated to reproductive by both socialism and capitalism, which carried forward this awful distinction between, quote, reproductive and productive work. And that's part of GDP and GNP, isn't it? So that a tree on which we depend to breathe is only part of GNP and GDP when it's dead, when it's a log. And as for the work of caring for people in households, it's just reproductive, it's not included in GDP. So we have a lot of change, but we know that change is possible and transformative change is possible because for millennia, and the evidence is getting bigger and bigger, uh, we oriented more to partnership rather than domination. And yes, the alternative to patriarchy is not matriarchy, which never really existed. Partnership, starting with partnership between the two basic forms of humanity. That was inherent, and we need to recognize that as one of the four cornerstones identified by research of either domination or partnership systems.
Riane, can we back up a little bit, and can you give the audience some more examples about why and how GDP is an unhealthy, unproductive index measurement for the output or the production of a species?
Well, what really is our most important and uniquely human work? And it's not, quote, feminine work. Caring is human work, as so many men are, young men, but also older men are saying, wait a minute, I can be caring. And not just for members of the in group, and certainly those on top in the in group, uh, but for others. And yet we are told so many stories like selfish genes were bad, right? Or, or again, original sin were bad, have to be rigidly controlled from the top, as in God fearing, at the same time that we talk about God being loving. I mean, these are not compatible messages. If you have to confuse respect with fear, uh, that is not loving. That maintains domination systems.
So, going back to some of those ancient stories, and as we know, stories are the things that can both prop up societies, systems, behaviors, habits, particularly dangerous ones. But you've written a lot about some of those ancient stories, and I want to pull some. I'm going to sound like an idiot here because I can only follow them really in the context of like sitting next to you. But in the Iliad and the Odyssey, female figures have been historically or are historically cast as villains or disposable slaves. And then you have those same kinds of examples in modern day content like the Game of Thrones or the Helen of Troy is blamed again. But why do civilizations or why have they so often begin their myths with the devaluation of women? Like, who started that?
Who started that? Well, we really
Who do I have to blame?
no, you're not going to blame them, at least not in my worldview, because shifting from domination to partnership is not a matter of blame or shame. It is, as I said, a matter of surviving and thriving. None of us really thrive in domination systems, even those on top. They're constantly afraid that somebody's going to dislodge them, right? I mean, nobody is, and there are hierarchies, my goodness. Again, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Uh, we have to understand. I had to coin new phrases, hierarchies of domination. We all know those. You do as I say, it's power over, or you're going to be punished, even by death, like by starvation, by torture, whatever, depending on how rigid the domination system is. So that is one possibility, certainly. But there are also hierarchies of actualization, and we're hearing a lot about them, like servant leadership. Where does that come from? Well, it comes actually, it's very ancient because at the core of all of our scriptures, our religious scriptures, are teachings of partnership, of interconnection. Think about it for a moment. If you will, feminine teachings of caring, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? I mean, that's at the core Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, but there's also this dominator overlay that arose. But the good news, again, is that it only arose about 5 to 10,000 years ago, which is a blip
Only, Rianne, I don't
in evolution.
most people, I mean, we're only in the year of 2025. What do you mean 5,000, 10,000 years ago?
Well, because it happened in our prehistory, and it relates to uh, the, at least in Europe, there were invasions from the areas in which, if you will, the Mother Earth was not a good mother. Marginal areas were only herding rather than farming. See, there was a shift, right? Technologically, from foraging, from gathering, hunting. And I say gathering hunting because we know, despite the dioramas in museums, which are all, male, that women did a lot of the gathering. And therefore, we also know that most of the calories consumed were from gathering, not from hunting. But we also know that women were hunters, by the way, even pregnant women. Think
Of
about it.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you ever seen pregnant women juggle their other children? I mean, I was just surrounded by a bunch of pregnant people this past weekend who are about to pop, and they're throwing their 2 and 3-year-olds over their shoulders like it's no big deal. And
Yes.
I also know that women don't quote I don't know where I learned this fact, but somebody told me that women historically have better shots, have better aim than men.
Well, I don't know that that is or is not true, that we excelled at this, but I do know that there was much more partnership rather than domination.
Yeah, there isn't the either or of women gathered, men hunted.
That's
So
right. Well, that's a crazy dominator myth. And it's been perpetuated by our museums, by our stories, by our narratives, by our language. But um, we can change. We have changed. I personally have also changed. There was a time in my life when I just accepted the status quo. And believe me, in the 50s, when I when I first married, tried desperately to fit into the little woman, right? The archetype of that time, a dominator archetype, the little woman behind the great man. Um, I did become an attorney, which you forgot to mention.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. And I worked for an entertainment law firm in Beverly Hills after I graduated from UCLA Law School. Um, and uh, the head honcho of that firm called me into his office one day to compliment me, quote unquote. And he said, and he meant it as a compliment, and I took it as a compliment, "You don't think like a woman." And, that's an insult.
Yeah, of course.
But both of us, me included, took it as a compliment. That's how baked in this ranking of the male form over the female form is in our culture. And what I then realized during the late 60s, early 70s, uh, when all these women, at least in the West, woke up, that what I had thought were my individual problems, I couldn't fit in somehow, were actually social problems
Right.
that I shared with all of these women. And that was a big aha for me.
Rianne, we talk a lot. I know that we have our own personal conversations about the things that I'm facing as a woman at this time in my life. And even for those of you who are watching, before we started, I said to Rianne, hold on one second, I have to go rotate the laundry. And like there's still these very like traditional laborious tasks that are faced. But one of the and this is where I go back to like, Rianne, how are you hopeful? But in the past, even just the past week and a half, the domination structure through which so much of the the United States is processing itself and processing the headline news that there's elected officials who know better than the people on the streets, that your husband or your religion or your faith knows better than your current intuition, that um, in my desperation to be in a partnership oriented personal relationship, I feel like I'm most partnered with the women of my age at this specific life experience that I sit, and not the men. I still feel like there's this like having to help men see, or having to help women see their capacity, or how the rest of the world has impacted the way that they think. And so I think about the 60s and the movement around the Equal Rights Amendment, and even like women not wanting to pass the ERA, to have women mentioned in the Constitution. It just feels like I'm so I don't know. I don't know the question that I'm asking, but I still feel like there's so much waking up that we all have to do.
Well, it is a waking up from the domination trance, isn't it?
It would be much easier to stay asleep. I actually feel that way. Particularly as like a privileged woman with resource, it's much easier to stay asleep.
Yes, in the short term, to stay afraid, to stay asleep, is easier. But in the long term, it's suicidal. Look, as I said earlier, the domination systems are not capable of meeting the unprecedented global interconnection, the challenges of nuclear weaponry, the challenge of climate change. I mean, only denial, and you're quite right, denial is much easier, but denial is also comes out of trauma, doesn't it? We're having a summit, as you know. Peace begins at home. And we have not paid attention in our public discourse enough to what neuroscience tells us, for goodness sakes, that we all should know by now. Because psychologists have been saying it for ages, our early experiences shape, well, neurologists tell us, neuroscience tells us, it shapes nothing less than our brain, the structure of our brain, because we are not born with fully formed brains. Most people don't think of that. Most people don't connect the dots. And we have, because we're not taught to do that. I mean, look at our conventional categories. They have nothing whatsoever, right, left, religious, secular, uh, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, capitalist, socialist. They don't include gender. They don't include family and childhood as a really important part of social systems. So, anyway, we're having this summit called Peace Begins at Home, and you can find out about it at a website at www.peacebeginsathome.summit. And please put in summit.org. Peace Begins at Home Summit.
We're gonna drop the link in the chat so that everybody can attend. And we'll also be streaming it here as well, so that people can ask Rianne live questions. And a friendly reminder that those of you in chat, and I see Dave Gold is already here participating and mentioning that every student in the world needs to hear this. Rianne, if I could ask you to start a little bit further back and like the 101, where did that like prehistory versus history transition happen? What happened when some of the religions and the stories started to devalue women, recognizing that it was the hunter gatherer, that there was like this cusp where we started looking at caretaking as primarily feminine when for prehistory? And I want to recognize that prehistory includes like 100,000 years before
millennia, actually.
millennia. That there's so much time before 2025 when the clock started around Christ's birth or death. Shoot, I actually don't remember which one it was, Rian. But can you tell us about where that shift has happened and how what's happened over the past 3,000 years has capitalized so much on caretaking and women?
Well, before I do that, let me give you some contemporary examples of technologically advanced societies that have shifted more towards partnership.
Great. The optimist in you and me being the negative one that's constantly like, where did we mess up?
And look at Ireland. Almost overnight, it shifted from a rigid hierarchies of domination. Dominator values, dominator myths and stories to partnership. Now, it's true that one of the people that I work with, Melanie Lynch, who did her story, who worked with the crew who did this wonderful cartoon inspired by my work that is vying for an Oscar now.
Excuse me? Wait, what is this? Say it
Uh,
again.
it's called the cartoon is called, I think, A Crew. But I'm honestly, at 94, I have to admit that I forget things.
You're allowed to, but let me see if I can find it. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
If you look at Ireland, you see the shift from domination to partnership, and yes, to understanding the importance of family violence, of what we called domestic violence, right? And that immediately downgrades it, doesn't it? It's less important. You know, I'm going to ramble a bit, but did you know that Putin, who is a dictator, an authoritarian, who invaded violently the Ukraine, right, some 2.5 years ago, he downgraded the certain forms of family violence from a criminal offense to just an administrative offense. Now, why would he do that if he didn't see the link that we're bringing out in the Peace Begins at Home Summit, the link between a rigidly male dominated, often violent, punitive, authoritarian family and that kind of a state? Because what do we learn when care is devalued? We not only learn that, we also learn that care is to be done for free by a woman in a male controlled household. Both Smith and Marx believed that, and they perpetuated it with their calling one that work, if it's in households, if it's not in the market, it's reproductive and it's not part of our GDP or GNP. I mean, think about it. What does it really tell us? It tells us that difference is not valued, right? And not coincidentally, as part of the regression, we see an attack on anything that values difference. I mean, you have to learn to connect the dots. And to do that, you really need a frame, and it's the domination partnership scale frame.
How do you what is the role? So if let me repeat back to you what I think you're what I believe I'm hearing is that over centuries and millennia, there has been a shift from the natural tendency of humans to take care of each other.
That's
That
right.
that is that everyone has the capacity to caretake, the desire to take care of, because innately we want to be taken care of too, to love and be loved. And over time, that became compartmentalized and pushed toward this feminine framework and was shunned. And there was language even in my lifetime in childhood, like, don't throw like a girl, don't cry like a girl, becoming a teacher, becoming a nurse, were all feminine oriented practices,
Helper professions.
the helper professions, and were a planned C, D, E, or F career versus one that theoretically could be incredibly rewarding. But that's an inherited framework of many, many thousands of years that propped up capitalism, and capitalism being an extractive economic model. You look at a tree and you value it based on how much lumber you can get from it, and then how much you can sell that lumber for at Home Depot. So you look at a tree and say, I can get 10 2x4s out of it and sell them each for $2. So that tree has the value of $20 to me. But we haven't gone beyond the framing of the value of the tree. There's the quantity of shade that provides to decrease the temperature on the planet. We don't do a very good job of calculating the amount of oxygen that it puts into the universe. And dare I even suggest that there's something very, very important about what one gets from hugging a tree or even just spending time in forests. And though that kind of demographic of people is like compartmentalized to the woo-woo-ness, but there's this sense of we only value something by the way that we can extract it. It's the same thing from a human being. We're only interested in the amount of socks somebody can sew, how many hours they can babysit our kid. And as a consequence, capitalism is built on extraction. And the most valuable extraction model is that of caretaking, because that's the generational dependency. Like, that's a thing that's always going to have to be consumed and consumed and consumed and consumed. Whereas over time, books don't need to be printed as much. You can't rely on books, or you don't need to rely on, I don't know, like locomotive steam engines. Like, I don't know. I'm making these things up. But the thing that has been universally true across generations through humankind has been the need to take care of. And it will always be true in the future. And so if that's the thing that's the most valuable and we don't want to pay for it, let's make it feminine, and let's make men not want to do those things, or let's start branding it as, if a man wants to do it, they're not really a man. Am
But
I a good student? Did I get an A?
you get an A. Absolutely. Absolutely get an A. You know, there are so many men that are today rejecting
Yeah,
that
a lot.
stereotype.
I think so
And
too.
men as well as women who have internalized this is not a matter of women against men or men against women. I mean, I keep repeating that because even the term feminism and matriarchy, they're exclusive. Now, we needed those terms. I'm a feminist. Uh, we needed those terms in order to have our identity, if you will, valued. And there has been a growth of women in leadership positions worldwide, which is certainly a good sign. You know, I mean, the conflict really for our future is not between capitalism or socialism. When you were talking about capitalism, I kept thinking domination economics because look, it goes back to a Chinese emperor, to an Arab sheikh, to an Indian pasha, uh, to a feudal lord. I mean, what is neoliberalism? Let's talk about that. It's
Okay, go
either
for it.
new nor liberal, we know that. It is really what is trickle down? It's trickle down economics, right? And what is that? It's a return to the most recent iteration of pure domination economics, to feudalism, isn't it? Where those on the bottom are to literally content themselves with the scraps falling from the opulent tables of those on top. And remember, there are hierarchies, but power is not in partnership systems equated with power over. It is power with, but it is also, and we hear less about that today because we're hearing a lot about power with. It is also power to. We are uniquely creative as a species. I mean, so much so, there are other species that are tool makers, for example, uh, but tool users, crows, for example, are very bright. they they actually don't make tools, but they use tools. But our creativity, just about everything, and I don't just mean the desk behind me or the computer in front of me or the books on my shelf or the ability to take photos like I have my family all over of me. They're all human creations, and so are our cultures. We are creators of our cultures, and if we just identify and fear those on top economically, starting in families, why do you think that you have these so-called Christian, which are not Christian, parenting guides that tell you that you have to train your baby to realize that the parent's will is law?
Mm.
Why do you think that? I mean, it all is, you have to learn to connect the dots.
Rianne, today we did a few hours. Oh, you're gonna love this. This whole week, um, we have been hosting conversations here on Twitch with um, young activists around the world. Today, we had a conversation with Abdul Rahman from Iraq, um, Baskil from Tunisia, Aceh from Cameroon, and Saji from Sri Lanka. And yesterday, we had a conversation with somebody from Nairobi, Algeria, Germany. The day before, I mean, like people are calling in. Uh-oh, speaking of youth, I hear my children have just arrived. They're absolutely going to bust through. So just bear with me as I shush them away. But we have had conversations with young people who are activists in their own country and their frustration, I mean, anger around the silencing of the youth voice, whether it's at the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, that there's this desperation for young people to be heard differently. And I think young people are rising up differently. But you see it in Nepal Nepal just overthrew its government and put a female prime minister in place in all of a matter of 3 days. And that was led by young people. The revolution in Myanmar and in Nairobi, that's all being led by young people. And they don't feel like they have a voice in making any decisions on their behalf, largely because the older people who now have positions of power have been raised to believe that young people don't know. And so we were talking today about how are we going to help ourselves, the Iraqi activists, the Tunisian activists, the American, the Sri Lankan activists. How are we going to remember when we are in positions of power? How are we going to forget what we learned that young people don't know?
This is so important because look, just putting a different group on the top does not change the system. You saw that in the former Soviet Union, which really, uh, Lake Baikal, remember the terrible nuclear accident, quote unquote. I mean, caring for nature was not part of them. And did you ever look at the Politburo? All male. I mean, there were women in the lower ranks with positions of some leadership, but not in the top, not in the top. So let's understand that what we need is to shift from domination to partnership. And that it's like really building the airplane while we're flying it, isn't it? And so, uh, one thing that young people have to remember is that the aim of this is not for them to be on top,
Right.
whether it's their ethnicity or their race or their gender, doesn't matter. Uh, but we also have to remember something else. These are traditions of domination, which really takes me to the research on four cornerstones. Because we tend to want to put out the fires that are constantly being caused by domination systems. Domination systems are trauma factories, starting in families, continuing in society and education and economics, politics. I mean, it is just we maintain the system by only doing that. Really, we are maintaining the system. We have to also, at the same time, focus on root causes. Root causes. One of them I've already mentioned is childhood and family. And everything I've mentioned about neuroscience showing that our very brains, and with this, how people tend to think and feel and act, including how they vote, is very much connected with their childhood in either a domination, highly punitive, often violent family. I mean, one of the things we're bringing out in this summit is that the United Nations uh, has found that no less than two-thirds, if not more, children globally live in unsafe homes, the place that should be the safest. Isn't that something? Because they're afraid. They're afraid of punishment and they're afraid of violence. The second is gender. If you think this is just a quote women's issue, you have internalized the dominator propaganda that this is God's will or whatever, you know. And it isn't that. It is a primary social, economic, and family organizing principle. And
Riane, keep going. I'm trying to pull up the four cornerstones model, and I'm not entirely sure how to do it. So you just keep talking while I try to figure this out, okay?
well, economics is the fourth cornerstone, and it's not this whole argument between capitalism and socialism, it's a distraction because both Marx and Smith made this spurious distinction carried forward by GDP and GNP of just only, reproductive work, which is not to be rewarded, and quote, productive work. And there are the four cornerstones. So, family and childhood. And yes, partnerism values the work of caring. Gender roles and relations. I don't know why it only uh, talks about relations. partnership values all people regardless of gender or other differences. What it really should say, a partnership, well, it does that. It values all people regarding of, I mean, difference is not automatically equated with either superiority or inferiority, with either dominating or being dominated, with either being served and serving, beginning with the difference in form between male and female. It's that simple, isn't it? I mean, this is basic. And of course, economic relations, partnerism recognizes that the real wealth of our world consists of the contributions of people and of nature, and they're all connected. So, narratives and language is the fourth cornerstone. We can all change our narratives. We can all re examine our narratives. I'm still doing that. I'm working with Melanie Lynch on, oh, well, that was a big thing, uh, of really showing that in the conventional thing, the household economy, the natural economy, and the uh, unpaid community economy are not considered, right? Only the market economy, the government economy, and to some extent the legal economy is part of GDP. I mean, think about that. Do we, and there's nothing in what Marx and Smith wrote about caring for nature, and as for caring for people, starting at birth, was to be performed for free, as was the norm of their time by a woman in a male controlled household. This is a dominator norm. Okay? So thank you for putting that up.
You're welcome. I'm actually very excited that I can do this now. And now I'm just going to click on images. Look at all these things that I'm just going to click on Riane Eisler images from the World Wide Web.
Okay.
Watch. Look, these are all of her books.
And they're not all of my books.
And they're not all of them.
But it is The Chalice and the Blade, The Real Wealth of Nations, Sacred Pleasure.
This is why I say she is the most important voice.
Well, you know, The Real Wealth of Nations is really a very important book because the subtitle of it is Creating a Caring Economics.
Can you, Riane, can you talk about the countries that have embraced that economic opportunity?
Oh, well, look, I mean, another example of countries that have shifted to the partnership side are Nordic nations like Finland, like Sweden, like Norway, Denmark. They have more caring policies. And yes, it is interconnected with the fact that women are in them not only heads of state, but 40 to 50% of the national legislatures. And it's not that women are better than men, but it's that, well, first of all, as the status of women rises, so also does the status of those qualities that are considered feminine, right? Like caring. So they have universal health care, they have very, very, oh my goodness, look at me.
Look how cute she is.
There I am. And that is the first cover of The Chalice and the Blade. It's gone over 3 covers, and if you buy a new edition, and I don't know how you do that on Amazon, I have no idea how, but just tell them you want a new edition because that 56th or 57th printing has the has a new
Is this it?
yeah, but it's this cover. But but actually, you have to get something that is a new edition
Okay.
because it has an epilogue taking us to
Oh
our
yeah.
frontiers. So, and as I said, this is a reaction to all the movements moving us, organized social movements that have accelerated over the past 300 years as the disequilibrium caused by the Industrial Revolution going into high gear. I mean, I draw very heavily from chaos theory, from nonlinear dynamics, from self-organizing theory, which, and my method of analysis is called the study of relational dynamics. And it not only focuses on what kind of relationships does a particular system support or inhibit, but also what is the relationship between the major elements of the system. And of course, childhood and family, gender roles and relations, economics, story and language, and yes, violence. Or isn't it strange that we don't even have a word? Non-violence is the closest we come, and it includes violence.
You know, it was interesting. So, one of the things that we're going to do in the exploring of this new world order, because you know that we're like, I'm not so secretly trying to build a new infrastructure for the future, whatever that looks like. I'm not interested in replacing the new UN. And I think there's some parts of the UN that have been helpful that we might want to evolve. And I think there's some systems within those global frameworks that are not helpful, not just like redundant, but like actively non helpful. And on today's call with, she is a Tunisian woman who is studying the definition of peace and security in the Mediterranean, specifically looking at Tunisians, Libyans, Syrians. And one of the ideas was, can we bring a coalition of people together to meet annually to reconsider language? Because the language in a lot of the conventions and declarations of the United Nations are very colonized. And she gave me an example that gave me a little bit of whiplash. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. But we were talking about language, and she kept saying, she's a fluent Arabic speaker, obviously. And she kept saying, I have 24 words to describe a friendship, a friend. And you only have one word, friend. You have like an acquaintance, friend, romantic lover. Like there's a couple of words, but I have 20 different words to describe a friend. In Arabic, it's a much more ancient language. And so, we were talking about how to decolonize a lot of the conventions and moving forward, again, like the adjustments to these kinds of documents, of which I'm like, I think we can just move on from some of them. But she gave me the example of the word empowerment, and how to say to empower women is to suggest that women never lived or existed in their own power to begin with. In the same way that when we don't reference slaves or slavery anymore. We reference people who were enslaved or enslavement. The idea that we have to give women the power they've always had back by not saying we'll re-give you your power, but sort of to like step out of the way. And I don't know, that's the best I can do. But it was just very interesting to think about our inability to describe ourselves, our relationships, our emotions, our relationship to each other, because we are using such limited language. And you said yourself, like one of the things that you were so pioneering around was just coining phrases.
Mhm. Well, I think that language will have to be a slower process than transforming consciousness, because there's so much to do with language. You know, I tried to study Esperanto, which was to be a universal language, and then I realized that nobody spoke it. So what
Wait,
was
what was it called?
Esperanto?
Esperanto? What do you, S?
Esperanto.
Uh-huh. What's the story behind Esperanto?
The story behind Esperanto was the impulse towards a universal language. But you see, it was premature, number one. And no, that's not
Oh, okay.
it.
Okay. Keep going. I'll find it.
Esper
Or ANTO.
Esperanto.
Okay, keep going.
Must be somewhere. But it's pointless because Finnish, for example, doesn't have a word for he and she. It's
Is that
just
true?
human, yes? And that's what we are trying to move toward with he or she or she slash he or they. But language is going to be something that will take time. Consciousness can happen overnight. It's like the boxes shifting in the head, isn't it? And that's what happened to me. I mean, I'm a good example of yes, transformation is possible.
Does that look right?
Esperanto as a glance, yes.
But why was this so critical? Because it took the gender away from?
No, Esperanto really, I don't know because I didn't have that consciousness at the time.
Oh.
I just had the impulse to learn a language that would be universal. So I really don't know whether it was or wasn't. And I think that, as I said, I think it was premature because we didn't have the consciousness that many of us have today about gender being a central organizing principle for family, for society, for economics, for education. I mean, look, gender studies are still marginalized, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they only started about 60 years ago. Uh, but I mean, you know, a historian of science, David Noble, wrote a book about the origins of Western science, modern science, and he called the book A World Without Women. And indeed, it had its origins in a clerical, monastic, misogynistic culture. Somebody wrote a wonderful book called Who Cooked Adam Smith's Supper, which I think is a wonderful title. Uh, but the point of it is, yeah, that is the Christian clerical culture of Western science. And why that book hasn't gotten more attention, I don't really know. And it was also, by the way, A World Without Children, if you think of it, um, where the feminine was to be serving men, cooking for them, cleaning for them, right? That was it. That's what women were good at. That's what women were for, to care for men. So, anyway, there's a lot to disentangle, but it's fascinating.
I love it. Now, Riane, hold on. Now that I'm an expert on dropping images, what comes to mind when I drop this image? Hold on.
I don't know. Let's
Hold
see
on.
what you're going to drop.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, the Da Vinci Code. Well, he claims, and of course he did, that he was very influenced by the Chalice and Divide. But it has to be fantasy. And it doesn't actually, because it is reality.
Well, okay, so this is long before I knew you, and this is long before I knew the Chalice and the Blade. But Is it fantasy or is there truth to it?
Well, there is truth to it. Look, Chinese archaeologists just discovered it, and it was in the Wall Street Journal, I think, um, an ancient prehistoric society that was matrilineal and that was more equal. I mean, there are all these findings, but they come at us in bits and pieces, and we don't have the frame. Oh, this was a pre domination, prehistoric society. Because matrilineal does not mean matriarchal. And the equality means that it was more partnership oriented. That's all. So again, this is not a question of women against men or men against women. It is really our choice.
Are you talking about the yeah, this must be it. Are you talking about June 2025, women likely ruled in Stone Age China? That one?
Yeah, but you see, again, women likely ruled. And that's not true. Women have women having women have power does not mean the same as women ruled. And I will repeat that.
Yeah, it's so interesting that it's constantly framed as domination one over the other.
That's right. And no wonder you have these guys who say, "What? I don't want to be subordinate," because all they can think of is, "Oh, well, as I said, the alternative to patriarchy is not matriarchy, never was.
Correct.
It's partnership." And it doesn't have to be perfect, but the norms we're talking about, the stories, the language, the families, how gender roles and relations, and how economic activity is or is not rewarded.
On that note, Riane, it's
Wait,
been
I
an hour and 5 minutes, and I want to be respectful of your time. Riane Eisler, as you've seen, all I do is spend time bragging about her. I have always had an intuitive hunch that Dan Brown's content was fact, and some of the greatest activists have always had this running joke. And who knew? And obviously, the research and the woman behind so many of those stories is Riane Eisler. Dan has a new book out called The Secrets of Secrets. That admittedly is my first book that I'm reading for pleasure in like a decade, because I'm a martyr and constant academic work. But Riane has a summit coming up on October 29th. We're going to drop the link to the summit in the show notes. Riane is going to be a frequent guest on the Land of Anne. And thank you so much for everybody's comments throughout this conversation, and whatever we can do to lift up this 94-year-old brilliant heart, accompanied by such a complex mind, we are committed to doing. So, Riane, I love you. Thank you so much for continuing to show up always generously. We'll see you on the 29th, but we will also see you before then. Until then, thank you. Blessings. Happy New Year.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and Shana Tova.
Tova to you too.
New Year, yes, it is the Jewish New Year. And I have to say that my first jolt, and it was a traumatic one, was in Vienna, where I was born, where suddenly my parents and we became hunted with license to kill, leading to what we all know as the Holocaust. Um, and it led me to the questions that really animate my work. Does it have to be this way when we humans have so much capacity for caring, for sensitivity? Uh, why has there been so much uncaring, so much cruelty, so much violence? Is it inevitable or is it an alternative? And it is the search for this alternative that led me to develop this whole systems research. And the methodology I call the study of relational dynamics. And it does take into account family and childhood, gender, of course, economics, of course, story and language. Uh, and yes, violence, fear, abuse is built into domination systems because how else? I mean, think about it. How else can you maintain hierarchies of domination rather than having what you also have in partnership societies? Because you have, parents and teachers and leaders and managers, hierarchies of actualization. Big difference.
So on in our next conversation with Riane, we're gonna look at the relational methodology and hierarchies of actualization, and we're also going to geek out on Kettle Huyak and some of the other prehistorical conclusions that she's drawn, because I think those are equally as sexy.
Well, it's very interesting. So many books are writing about Çatalhöyük, and so many books fail to mention gender.
But you haven't.
But
Okay, Riane Eisler, we will see you, I believe, next week. If not next week, then the week after. But a lot more to come from you. Blessings. We love you. We are eternally grateful.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure being with you.
Bye, Riane.
Bye.